Welcome back to the Christian Bitcoin podcast with me, Tim Fox, with the Magnalia Foundation, working on orange pilling the church, helping the church and Christians see how Bitcoin can help them honor the Lord and fulfill the Great Commission. We are joined again by Ben Hailey. Ben, would you please introduce yourself?
Hey, Ben Hailey, Senior Pastor, Redeemer, College Station, Texas. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You were the mastermind behind the PCA's Bitcoin overture. We're both PCA ministers. Could you give a quick recap of what that overture was about and
Sure.
What GA is, which just happened last week?
Yeah. The overture was really an encouragement for the church, presbyteries, and our General Assembly committee and agencies, which is our three courts, to study the wisdom of including Bitcoin on their respective balance sheets and kind of think about what good questions we can ask around our current landscape and why that might be a good idea to study.
Right. You want to briefly summarize how the overture went down and how it was received?
Sure.
Before we move on to bigger picture stuff about Bitcoin at GA and our time there?
Sure. So the overture arrived at the Overtures Committee through South Texas Presbytery. So I submitted South Texas Presbytery. It was approved and sent to the General Assembly. When overtures are sent, they first go to Overtures Committee, and completely separate, I happen to be the overtures representative this year for our presbytery. So Monday and Tuesday we met all day as a committee. This is before General Assembly proper starts, and we just start marching through the overtures and making amendments, or when there's overtures that are along the same line of thinking, having those refer to one another to get it down to kind of one overture. And the South Texas Presbytery overture number 11, came before us on Tuesday late afternoon. We had put in 2 pretty hard days, and they grouped the overtures kind of according to subject matter, and some have to go earlier because they pertain to rules of assembly operations that would be in effect that immediate General Assembly. So study stuff usually gets put to the end, and so those were all grouped together. But I was able to give about a 6-minute speech in favor of the overture. There wasn't any discussion. As I said, we had been putting in 2 long days. Went to a vote. It got voted down, but I had a number of teaching and ruling elders approach me at the end of the meeting saying they had actually voted for it, and some of them actually are Bitcoiners. And so I was just super encouraged by that. And then Magnalia showed up, booth ready Tuesday morning, and I was there some, but from what I understand, y'all had continual traffic, which was super encouraging.
Right.
We had lots of conversations, 2 meetups. The overture itself then comes from Overtures Committee to the floor of General Assembly on Thursday, and we discovered a procedural loophole that did not permit you, as another teaching elder from South Texas, to actually speak to the overture. I've spoken with several other attendees that also, let me say it like this, real quick, for some, if you're Presbyterians and you're listening, you might get this. The overture came in what's called an omnibus. That means like we're going to vote on a batch of overtures together because they received either overwhelmingly positive recommendation from the Overtures Committee or overwhelmingly negative. They all get batched together. We do one vote, but any one delegate on the floor can request that overture be pulled out of omnibus and therefore spoken to and voted on separately when we kind of circle back to dealing with the overtures individually. And Overture 11 came up, and someone rose to call the question, which means go to an immediate vote, no debate. I had never seen that happen
Right.
in any General Assembly, and from my, quick survey of others, they had never seen that happen. So,
Right. Yeah. It was a couple of things kind of coming together. It
Yes.
was people really tired and I think probably hungry. The fire alarm had gone off in the middle of the night before. People
Yes.
were not in the mood to discuss things that most people agreed about.
Yes.
And one of the things in church government as well as political government is this idea of not letting the majority just trample over the minority. And so parliamentary procedure on paper is there to help give a voice to people who maybe wouldn't get a hearing right away.
Yes.
And
I
so,
mean, the fatigue over the two overtures that came with minority reports by rule have to come first. And there was three and a
right,
half,
and those
4
went very
hours
long.
of debate on that. But at the same time, I mean, it was disappointing that South Texas, did not get a hearing
Right.
on that. But
Right.
overall, I think we had a great week.
No, yeah, it was really positive.
It was
I mean, going back
fantastic.
to your committee with the overtures committee and your speech there, it was not a surprise to us that it got voted down and strongly
Correct.
voted down
Right.
because there had been quite a bit of rumbling, especially from the PCA agencies leading up to the GA that were opposed to it, confused about why we're even talking about Bitcoin,
Yeah.
didn't see the point of it. And so you were able to kind of address some of that in your speech because they had already submitted their responses and they mostly
Yes,
were like,
and just to
we don't
make
get this.
Yeah, just to make clear, I've been in communication. Both you and I have been in communication with those agency heads for over a year about kind of thinking through those things. So I don't want anybody to think that we sprung that. It was a very
Right. Yeah. I mean, we love the church and we love the institution of the church. There's been a lot of chatter on Twitter since GA where people from outside the PCA are scratching their heads. I don't understand these weird Presbyterians with all of their
Yes.
parliamentary rules. And the institution seems so kind of top heavy and slow. And you and I love the church and we want to work through
love it.
the proper channels.
She's a mess, but we have procedures in place again.
Right.
To be heard, and again, we discovered a procedural loophole, and so, I don't think only myself, but others also may be submitting an overture to amend those.
Right,
rules
to
of
allow
assembly
for when
operation.
someone wants to pull out an overture to speak to it, they
That's
actually
right.
get to speak to it. I did
That's
stand up
right.
first. The moderator was supposed to call on me first, but
Correct.
by the time he realized that, it was already too late because of how
Correct.
the procedure
Yes.
works.
And
But,
that rule would go for anyone speaking in the future ever on anything. So it's not just
Right.
this Bitcoin.
Yeah,
related thing.
the brother
It happened
did the
twice,
same thing
actually.
to someone right after me on a totally
Yes.
different subject. Just immediately kind of decapitate discussion and move on. And the
Yes.
assembly agreed, we don't want to talk about this. But, even with kind of the stuff going into GA and the agencies opposing it, you were able to speak to it and you got a much more positive reception than I was expecting. And there was, I think, the committee has, over 100 guys on it. It was something like 12% of them actually voted for it, which was more than I was expecting. I thought
That's correct.
if
It was
we have a few
100 to
guys,
15.
that'll be good.
Yes.
Right. So 15 people voted for it. And, when my speech got judo chopped, I had a few people come up to me and say, well, I knew I was going to vote no on the overture, but I was really interested to hear what you had to say. And you had somebody tell you from your committee, that was fascinating. I'd never heard anything like this before.
Yes. That plus further questions about how to incorporate. I mean, real practical questions. Not just, hey, that was great, gave me something to think about, but like, hey, I really structurally we need to think about this. And I'm like, that's
Right.
correct.
Right. And then on top of the overture stuff, which in some ways went better than we were expecting, in other ways we were surprised to see that there was a technical way to stop debate on it, which was a disappointment, but oh well. On top of all that, it was a great week overall in terms of just conversations with people coming up to us at the booth, surprised to see somebody talking about Bitcoin. I was there most of the time. Jim was there most of the other time. Ben was there helping us out quite a bit. And there was, quite a few people that came up and already knew about Bitcoin and were interested in it. And a lot of questions about how do you give to your church with Bitcoin, which is the kind of stuff we help with a lot. But then also there was quite a few people who were just coming up and just saying, I don't understand this. Explain it to me. what does this have to do with the church at all? Or I just don't understand what Bitcoin is. People have kind of heard about it by now, but are still pretty baffled by it. But no one, being hostile or, polemical with us. It was a steady stream of people very interested, people in the PCA who are already into Bitcoin, both teaching elders and ruling elders, who are just already excited about it and excited to see that there's other people and want to work with us on helping the church benefit from this great tool that God has given us. So yeah, overall, I was really pleasantly surprised how positive it was. We had 2 meetups, 2 evenings back to back, and both of them were well attended, and guys just encouraging each other and encouraged to hear from each other and be with each other.
And also curious guys who, came as a result just of hearing about the overture or hearing about it coming to the booth, who didn't know anything about Bitcoin. Some of those guys came to, and came to the meetups, and we were able to answer questions, kind of talk about some of the main subjects around Bitcoin, like
right.
What is money, economics, those sorts of things.
Well, yeah, and in our side of things, thinking in terms of a North American church, we've mainly emphasized, hey, this is a way to save money or preserve wealth, those kinds of things, this kind of hedge against inflation and money printing. But the whole other side of Bitcoin is that it can't be censored and it can't be turned off. And so you have this whole application to missions and to the persecuted church around the world. And that was another whole cool thing, because in the exposition hall, there's all these different booths, and a lot of them have to do with missions, and a lot of them have to do with reaching people groups in the developing world, many of which are being persecuted by their governments. And so some of them came up to us and they're like, wait, you can just send money to Pakistan? One lady was saying, we do pastor training in Pakistan. We get, every month or 2, we get shut off and we have to find a new way to send dollars there. And she couldn't believe it, that there's a way to you can just send Bitcoin and no one can stop you. We had a little demonstration set up inspired by our friend Oshua, put up a couple missionaries on a map and said, hey, you want to send some missionaries some Bitcoin? And kind of just demonstrating for people. I'll, open this app. It doesn't ask you your social security number. It doesn't ask you for an email address. You just suddenly have a Bitcoin wallet. I'll instantly send you a little bit of Bitcoin, and you can instantly send it to this missionary in Central Asia or India or wherever. And so that was a pretty cool thing too. I went around a little bit to some of the missions booths and said, hey, have you guys heard Bitcoin? And are you guys having trouble getting money to workers overseas in closed countries? And for the most part, it was like, no, I've never heard of this. I had no idea. That's really amazing. We need to talk more about this.
Yeah.
So that was a whole other side of it, that it may be fairly affluent American Christians who aren't worried about the government turning them off or closing their bank accounts don't think about, but this is a huge need around the world.
It's a huge need, and I don't even know if you and I have been able to talk about a conversation that I had at the table with Jim, a pastor from a country, an indigenous pastor from another country came up to us, and he was kind of like, what is this? And we started explaining it to him, and he said, our currency is collapsing. I like a very forlorn, serious look.
Right.
Our currency is collapsing, and our country might default. And we were able to kind of explain to him everything you just said, and actually signed him up on a wallet and gave him information on how to, study this more. So that was kind of like a real moment there at the booth.
Right. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And, I've thought some, and, you got to be careful about the book of Acts and drawing one-to-one parallels to today and to the church today. But I have wondered sometimes, I think it's in Acts 9, you have the prophet who stands up, I think Agabus, and says, hey, there's a famine coming. The church needs to get ready for this. And the apostles agree, okay, yeah, we need to get ready. Something hard is coming. And obviously, we're not prophets in that sense. We don't have an inspired word from the Lord about the future or about Bitcoin. But there is sort of a corollary of, hey, there is something really hard that's already happening, but it's going to get worse for the world. And the church needs to get ready for it.
Right. And I think even if you extract the fear out of, our current landscape, and you kind of zoom out a little bit, we spent much of the morning, Thursday morning, before overtures even came up, we spent much of the morning talking about fiscal deficits in our agencies. I mean, I had never seen that much talk on the floor down to the granular of budget deficits. And so you begin to ask the question, is there something else going on here? And let me talk for a second about micro, macro.
Yeah, go for it.
The concept of life on the margin, kind of define that, give you an illustration of that. So when I was a kid, I grew up in the summers on our family farm with my grandparents. And I will probably slip and say Mama and Papa, so it's just going to happen. So just brace for that. But anyway, my grandfather, I can't remember exactly what work I'd been doing that morning or something. He was like stacking hay or fixing fences or something. And he gave me $18. And then he said, we're going to the sporting goods store tomorrow. And I was just excited. You know, I'm 12, 13 years old. I have, as a 12, 13-year-old, a high time preference, which means, in my opinion, in my kind of definition, I am highly anxious to consume as fast as I can. So, we used to say the money's burning a hole in your pocket. Well, that was me, right? And I think that's pretty normal. Anyway, he gives me this $18, and what's that $18? It is the store of the value, right, that I put into stacking that hay or fixing the fence. He rewarded me with that $18. So I had this $18 that stores that value. I go to the sporting goods store, and I knew I was going to spend the money. I didn't know if it was going to be on a pocket knife or 10 bags of peanut M&Ms or whatever. It didn't matter. But I stumbled upon a brand new pattern, mossy oak camouflage pattern. I grew up hunting. I wanted a new camouflage shirt, and I looked at the price tag and it said $22. Well, I had $18. So I went to my grandfather and I was like, "Hey, Papa, can I have $4 more?" He's like, "No." He said, "Go up there and see if he'll take $18 for it." Now, I'd seen him do this many times in my life, but I was nervous. So here I come to the counter with my $18 of stored value, wanting this cool new patterned camouflage shirt. The price was $22. Now, that moment where I come to the counter with my dollars and ask the man for a shirt, that moment is called on the margin. Okay, so you think about margins. Just take a piece of paper. You got a piece of paper, notebook piece of paper, and you got a line down the left-hand side. Let's forget the right-hand side for a second. There's no margin on the right-hand side. And inside, between the margin and the end of the page, at any moment, is my fixed supply of money. Now, you can put time and energy in that same thing. Time, energy, and money. And then I go to this moment where I want to spend some of my money on this thing. So I meet this guy at the margin, on the margin. In that moment, there's a lot of things happening, right? He's estimating if he wants my money more than he wants to keep that shirt. And I'm estimating if I want that shirt more than I want to keep my money. Okay? It's just a micro moment. There's a lot of anxiety just fixed into that moment right there.
Right.
Just extracted from...
You don't know.
You don't know. Extracted from sin. Let's not even talk about all those things. In that moment, I made a decision. I value that more than I value the $18. Now, the price at that moment really doesn't matter, because life on the margin is two parties evaluating the value of what they have and what that other person has.
Right.
And so I said, "Mister, I'll give you $18 for that shirt." He kind of looks at me. And what's he doing in that moment? He's deciding if he wants to make that exchange of value.
Right.
And he does, and he did, and it was awesome, right? Now, that's a little micro picture going on. All this anxiety in that moment and that sort of thing. Now, one of my jobs as a pastor is to closely monitor my own anxiety and closely monitor the anxiety of maybe a person I'm talking with. And it's my job to closely monitor anxiety in a system, particularly the system that I'm most a part of, which is my local church. I'm constantly having to watch that anxiety. Okay, so I saw that anxiety Thursday morning in the room at General Assembly
Right.
as we were talking about money. Now, let's drill it back down. Let's take the camouflage shirt and that interaction into a church budget meeting, right? Elders are sitting around the table. They're trying to figure out what to allocate funds to. And value is read into that by everyone. People
Right.
come to, the session with budget requests. The elders have to make those decisions. That moment in that room is an on the margin moment, right? A lot of anxiety in that moment, and we just have to name it. Now, I will say, just as a side note, most of the time we're having that conversation, we're trying to decide between two competing good values.
Right.
That's what's lost in that conversation sometimes, unfortunately. It's like, well, you don't value this or, at all. It's like, no. Remember, life is lived inside that margin in the edge of that paper. That's what we got.
Right.
And so we have to make these decisions. So a lot of anxiety in that decision, in those moments. And you know how it is. It's like, as a pastor, you know how it is, when we get to budgets or we talk about finances, the room goes quiet. It's tense because forget the macro for a second. We've got to make a decision. We can't run from that decision. We have to shepherd people up to those moments, through those moments, and out of those moments. That's what we're called to do as elders. That was a moment that was happening, in my opinion, on Thursday morning. Well, the bigger question is, are there possibly other macro factors contributing to that moment as well that we can't quite name and we can't quite understand? One of the things that's obvious to me, especially as I pastor younger families, is this macro anxiety, chronic anxiety in the system, in the global financial system.
Right.
And so you have to begin to ask questions. What is contributing to that global macro anxiety that also might be adding to those micro budgetary moments, even my micro camouflage shirt at the store moment, right?
Right.
And when you begin to ask questions, are there macro factors in forming that moment? The answer is yes. Inflation.
Right.
Inflation is informing that moment because when we print more money, that money eventually has to settle down into match the supply of goods in society. And so prices go up. And if wages don't pace with that, which they don't, coupled with the fact that different things inflate at different rates at any given moment,
Right.
it produces that anxiety of, I don't have a just and weight measure by which I can make strong plans and have strong vision.
Right.
And in a church setting for the ministries that we believe the Lord has called us to steward.
Right.
So does that make sense how I just kind of played that out?
Yeah, no, totally. And it's like, as a pastor, you get a front row seat into not just kind of church conflict, but also just family marital conflict and how often that has to do with money too. Money is never just about money. It's just a tool that you use to kind of measure things. Money is very emotional because it represents things for people. For some people, it represents security. For some people, it represents freedom or fun or whatever. And so when you have elders on a session meeting, or you have a husband and a wife that are on different pages about what money means and what it should do for them, you are bound to get conflict and people get really stressed out about it. And, you were talking about, wages not keeping up. Because I explained this to a couple people at the booth who are asking, what's the deal with Bitcoin? Why does this matter? And I was trying to say, if the price of everything just doubled instantly at the same moment, that wouldn't really matter. That just means now we're just using a different number, or we're just adding a zero to everything at the same moment. But because we are, not perfectly logical, powerful robots who can do that, we're humans dealing with all kinds of gaps in knowledge and power and ability. Inflation can't happen instantly at the same moment for everyone. It has to be at different moments and different amounts for different people and different, depending on how close you are to the money getting out into the world. And so, it's, I was just reading something a couple months ago about just kind of wages in like normal careers and how when you start a new job, usually this is when people get a significant bump up in their pay, and it's hard for it to go up quickly from there, even if the prices of everything else is going up. Wages are sticky. They don't go up very fast. And so over time, people's wages tend to not keep up with the price of things as the money printing is going on. And so that's hard enough in a normal, office dynamic, normal secular career. And then you add on top of that in a church context where there is all kinds of fear and anxiety and stress and sin, and bad examples you can think of about pastors getting paid. And it gets even more stressful because a pastor coming and asking to get a raise can be very intense emotionally, and it can be really hard. And it is a significant reason that pastors end up resigning or finding another church or getting sideways with the elders or the congregation. And so, yeah, there's just so much, so many landmines when it comes to money in the church and in ministry.
And I want to. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
I was just going to say, I think what you're saying, this kind of bigger macro atmosphere that you're breathing, and people don't quite realize that they kind of know that something's wrong, but they're so used to it that it just feels normal, and it feels kind of weird to talk about it, and it feels weird to step back and say, there's more going on here than that so-and-so or the pastor or that agency head is doing something wrong, or they're not working hard enough, or they're not giving enough money, or they're not being efficient enough. That might be true, and of course, that can be true, that the pastor needs to work harder, or the agency head needs to be more conscientious with his budget. But you need to also step back and ask hard questions about what's going on in a big picture, and what are we so stressed out about here?
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize two things as Christians as far as how we go about evaluating these things, right? Because I did get some different feedback last week of like, hey, you're just spewing doom and gloom fear, and I'm like, hold up, I'm actually not permitted by Jesus to live in fear. That he doesn't allow that. I'm asking you not to attribute that motive of fear. I'm asking you to just say, let's just look at the math.
Right.
Just look at the truth of the math and the landscape that we're currently in. And then secondly, I think it is also incumbent upon me and all of us to not ascribe motives to others. For example, I generally speaking believe that people are doing the best they can do. And for the record, my doctrine of total depravity is in its fullness, and I actually don't think those two things conflict. So I say that, go, hey, these guys are doing the best they can do with their budgets. Can we get 2 to 5% more efficient? Sure, maybe. Right. But is there something bigger going on that it would really benefit us all to just look at the economics of, I'm supposed to say economics. My son corrects me. Economics, Dad. Is there something else going on that it would really benefit us all? Let's take the anxiety out of the room. Let's take the power games out of the room. Let's take all that out of the room and just look at numbers over the past 5 years, 17 years. So I'm speaking to 2020 print, big print, 2008 big print, right? Let's take all the emotions out and let's just look at the numbers and go, hey, the math ain't mathing.
Right.
And I think on the heels of this big bill passing, the market, the bonds, the UK bonds overnight are like going ballistic, are signaling big time inflation is coming. Right. The problem is at what rate, when, how much, and you do feel paralyzed by the macro a little, some on how to plan, how to have a 5, 10, 100-year vision.
Well, and
so I just
for a long
acknowledge
time,
that reality.
Right, and for a long time, people have more or less been able to keep ahead of that through, oh, you invest in the stock market, you get some bonds. It kind of just works out, and it has been okay. And so then the logical fallacy is that just because it has been okay doesn't mean it therefore will be okay. Just because something has worked for 50 years doesn't mean it'll keep working. But it's hard for people to kind of wrap their heads around that, especially in America, where everything kind of seems to have worked out for us in the last 50 or 60 years, in spite of all kinds of other bad things going on. It's like, well, things are still pretty good, and we've never had, a full-on currency collapse. That's something that happens in other places, or hyperinflation is something that happens for other people, but that doesn't affect us, and we just got to keep doing what we're doing. And this is one of the big walls we bump into, is this investing versus saving thing, and that everyone thinks, well, you just gotta run around like a crazy person investing your money, trying to keep ahead of your money losing its value. And our denomination kind of has ways of doing that, and people with expertise who give advice about that, especially for pastors and retirees. But, there is I think a legitimate question, like you're saying, of just the pure math of it. We're just a couple of dumb pastors, but, it's not hard to go out and see the math that this doesn't add up. There's no way they can pay all this off.
Yeah, because I think what I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, and I think some of the criticism that we received, on paper from agencies and others, was that you just need to focus on the gospel. And I said,
Right.
Look, the good news of the gospel is preeminent for me in my calling every day. And we have budget meetings.
Right.
And that's
yeah,
also
it's
part
not.
of my. We can't dichotomize those two things. And I think also on the inflation piece, name me a middle class or lower middle class and lower family who thinks inflation, well, it just kind of is okay, and that's fine.
Right.
In other
Right.
words, name me a family who does not have assets priced in dollars like stocks, bonds, and real estate. Name me that family. You won't find that family. You'll only find that statement that have assets that rise. The price rises in dollars when there's inflation. That's my point. And that's a significant, we are in a significant minority in the world's population, and even in our nation's population. We are in a significant minority if we have assets priced like stocks, bonds, and real estate in dollars.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think
life is lived on the margin for.
Right. And there are, like you've said, many of the young families that are doing the best they can, but they can't buy houses. They are deep in debt. And I think it's sometimes hard for people who have been able to time, and I talked about this, if you're able to get a house when it was easier to get one, it's hard for you to kind of hear what's going on from people who are like, look, this isn't just that I'm not working hard enough. This isn't just that I'm some snowflake who wants, avocado toast every morning. Like, it is so expensive to own a house right now.
Yeah, I mean, just for context, my first salary was $36,000 salary and housing as a pastor, and I was able to buy a house in 2004.
Right.
That math ain't math.
It's like a different planet now.
It's a different planet. And because I was able to sneak in and get that house, when there was inflation, the price of the house went up. So then I was able to take that, sell that house, I had enough to make a down payment on a bigger house, right?
Right.
And it just rolls. But if you can't get into those assets, you're out.
Right. And even if you do get the assets, like the stocks or the house or whatever, if it's not growing by more than 7 or 8% a year, which is probably more like what the rate of money printing is.
Yes.
Then you're actually losing ground. And so people think, oh, my house is going up so much. Isn't this great? This is my nest egg. This is my savings. And, there's a decent number of pastors who have been able to buy a house, and this is going to be a significant part of their retirement savings. But it's like, okay, it's great to have a house, but a house is not a great way to save money. It's actually a pretty crummy way to save money.
Right. And it's not what it was made. It's not what it was designed to do. It was never designed to store monetary premium on top of its utility value. was never made to do that. It's only actually, I don't know, in the last, beachfront property and those sorts of things are always going to have value because of the fixed supply, and that's fine. But I'm talking about whole suburban neighborhoods, where BlackRock has parked a ton of money because they need to store that value somewhere, right? So,
right. Yeah, and going back to this kind of false dichotomy of you can either focus on money and investing or you can focus on preaching the gospel. That we don't think that's true, but that's obviously not true even, within the discussions we were having at the General Assembly.
Correct.
Like you said, we spent a lot of time as part of our business deliberations for the sake of the gospel talking about money and budgets and, taking shots at each other about, well, you did this wrong or this guy's doing that wrong. And it's like, okay, first of all, this is a part of what it means to carry out the ministry of the gospel, is to be a good steward of resources. We all know that at one level. But it's also like, it's so much easier to blame other people and blame their, they must have chosen to do something wrong financially, therefore they're the bad guy. And I've often kind of said that in a lot of ways in a church, a pastor is kind of a stand-in punching bag for God. You can't punch God, but you can punch a pastor because he's up there speaking for God in a way. And in some ways, I was seeing that same dynamic at General Assembly, where it's like, okay, these guys who are doing their best, and okay, yeah, maybe they are making some mistakes and they could do things a little better and more efficiently. But it's like, it's easy to take swings at them instead of asking what's going on from a big picture perspective here, and is there something else going on that maybe these people don't have control over, and it's not necessarily their fault.
Correct. And I do, at the risk of sounding like I'm ascribing motive, but also throwing myself completely into that mix, there's control idolatry, and then there's just a longing to order the world according to something that you can trust. And that's okay. That's okay.
Right, yeah, and like you're saying, this is
control idolatry. I ascribe the motive of everybody in that room was trying to order the world according to, our gospel ministry call.
Right. And like you were saying earlier, on the margin, you always are choosing between the next best options. What is my priority here? And people come with different sets of priorities, and like you're saying, that shows up in elder meetings where Elder A prioritizes X and Elder B prioritizes Y, and therefore we have to figure out what to do about it. Because, being pastors and being a church, being a denomination, just because you are engaged in a spiritual, heavenly mission on earth doesn't mean you therefore get to transcend earthly limitations or earthly scarcity.
Right.
Apart from God doing miracles, which God can do, of course, God can take a couple of loaves and feed thousands of people with them. That's not normally how God works, and that's not normally how God provides for his people and for his church. You have to deal with scarcity, and you don't get to teleport beyond it just because you're a church.
Yeah, and I think this has been missed in this conversation a lot, where, be very clear, we're not talking about investments.
Right.
We're talking about money and economics. Those are two different things. Now, do they inform each other? Yes. And somebody might say, well, the price of Bitcoin is going up. It's acting like an investment. And my response is, it's not an investment. We just happen to be in on capturing the asymmetry between the dollar as a monetary unit and Bitcoin as a monetary unit. We just happen to be capturing the arbitrage right now between those two things. That's not the same as an investment. And so I try to, and I know that might be too, but my point here is all of us deal with money and economics every day. Whether it's money, time, energy, we're all constantly economizing our lives and making value judgments based on that.
Right. Yeah. Nobody is saying or thinking the gospel doesn't matter.
Exactly.
We all agree on that. That's the easy part. The hard part is the next step. Okay, what do you prioritize for the sake of the gospel? Because we all have limited resources. We have limited time, limited people, and limited money. and limited giving from your people. You can't just go around beating them over the head and saying, well, this is your problem. You're not giving enough. Give,
right.
give,
And
give.
we have to pastor and shepherd through all of that anxiety.
Right.
We have to call ourselves to trust the Lord that he has drawn the lines in pleasant places, to quote Psalm 16.
One of my favorites.
And we can be faithful inside of these, and we have to make hard decisions inside of these, and we have to trust that the Lord is going to continue to bring about his kingdom.
Right.
Period.
Well, and
we get to participate in it,
Of course. We're saying this as Americans, in one of the wealthiest countries that's ever existed.
Yes.
So it's easy for us to say. But of course, God can do anything, and God can work through his people even when things are really bad and really hard and they don't have resources. God can get the gospel out however he wants, even with limited resources. Let's say the currency is collapsing. Is that going to stop God? No, of course not. But on the other hand, being a Christian doesn't mean you go out and look for suffering, or you think that suffering is a wonderful, great thing. God works in suffering, of course. Scripture is full of examples of God revealing his power and his grace through the weakness of his people. But at the same time, we shouldn't shrug our shoulders and say, well, who cares? Money doesn't matter, or poverty doesn't matter, inflation doesn't matter. This is real suffering, and it does make things hard for the church.
Right. So part of our theology is that God has baked all of that into the means by which he brings about his kingdom. I love the end of the book of Acts. It ends with one word. I can't remember the Greek. In the English, is translated without hindrance. The kingdom of God was advancing without hindrance. It's one word, unhindered. And it just feels like this huge statement from Luke to say nothing is going to stop the kingdom. Okay, so when you have that baked in under God's sovereignty, I believe it actually promotes and accelerates and incentivizes and catalyzes us asking these types of questions. My confidence that the kingdom of God is coming, that's not, first of all, I can't do anything about it. Second of all, I truly do believe that God has baked it into his sovereignty. It actually provides the framework from which we can ask these questions, again, without fear and without motive ascribing, and go, hey, what's this landscape? Math ain't mathin'. Right. So. Right.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, the end of Acts, you have Paul in Rome under house arrest. He's, in one sense, severely hindered.
I forgot that part. Yeah, that's the whole
in what he can do.
Yes.
He's preaching the gospel from prison. But Acts ends with this great confidence that in any case, the gospel is not hindered, in spite of the fact that the apostle is hindered physically.
Yes.
But at the same time, Paul is not indifferent to the fact that he's in prison. The whole point is that he's trying to get out of prison. He wants to go to Spain to preach the gospel to the nations.
Yes.
And, he does all kinds of things to make things easier or simpler or to avoid going to prison or getting arrested. Right.
He makes his appeal. He has a lawful right to make that appeal. He's like, well, I'm sitting in prison. I'm going to preach the gospel, but I'm going to make my appeal.
Right. Yeah, God's not stopped by this, but you don't shrug your shoulders at it and say, oh,
correct.
Well, what's going to happen is going to happen. We don't care.
And that's what I'm saying. That sovereign, that trust in God's sovereignty actually compels you and frees you to do things like make an appeal to Caesar in Paul's case.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's, I mean, what would you say to those who are trying to, whether we're talking about finance itself, or you're talking about Bitcoiners who are bumping up against their churches and their pastors not understanding what they're talking about, or they're just in general just talking about anxiety at all. How would you counsel somebody to wisely handle these kinds of anxiety issues around big picture issues? How do you walk in love and wisdom and humility and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I got to set my own heart right and be like, all is gift. Any of the understanding that I've come to in some of these things has happened in God's providence, by God's grace. And that immediately, because my tendency is just to say, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, whoa. A humble posture on myself is something that I'm constantly having to address. It really comes out when I'm very passionate about things, which is most things. But anyway, I think that, but I also think like hey, let's name what's going on. Let's slow down. Let's peace out. So in a shepherding moment, I think that's what you're asking me. In a shepherding moment, let's slow things down. Let's name what's going on. Let's parse out worry and concern. So one of my senior pastors, he's really great. He said we got to parse out worry and concern. Worry is like big sovereign things that, hey, God's just gonna have to do something. Concerns are things that I can take action steps on. Let's parse those out. Let's slow it down, and let's walk through it and seek understanding. Lean into the reality, not of how things should be, but how things actually are currently. Let's lean into that. Let's ask for God's grace and wisdom in that, and then let's go from there. That's kind of my MO. In any situation, whether it's money or not, right?
Right. One of our
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. I think you're good at that. I appreciate that about you. One of our fellow presbyters in South Texas Presbytery, Alan Taha, told me one time, I think about this all the time. He said, you never have to be the passive recipient of other people's anxiety. And the reason I like that is because it doesn't mean don't deal with people's anxiety. If you're going to be in any kind of relationship with anyone, you're going to be bumping up against other people's anxiety, legitimate or not. Yes. There is a way, though, and again, it's easier said than done. There is a way to carry other people's anxiety, but without letting it overwhelm you and control you. You can enter into their suffering and their anxiety and their fear.
Yes, and this we're venturing off into a lot of things, but it all ties together. I mean, 2020, 2021, and trying to plant a church in the middle of COVID, I had to deal with this. In myself, and I had to learn to recognize what's happening in the system. Chronic anxiety had overcome my church plant. Not their fault, but I had to name it. I had to recognize it. I had to learn how to de-escalate. I had to learn how to recognize this emotional charge in the system. I had to learn my position in that system and how I influenced that system based on my position as the church planter. I had to study and read and name and go, okay, this is what's going on. This is how we can walk through this together.
Right.
And, reading a lot of books, like let me say it like this. And I said this yesterday, actually, in a pastoral situation. I said, hey, is this thing that you're going through right now too big for me or too big for some people? Absolutely. It is too big. No human was ever designed to carry the brokenness of what this situation is. But here's how we're going to do this. We're going to hold hands together. We're going to submit these things continually to Jesus, who is big enough. I have to do that all the time with my own heart and with others.
Right. It's like, in one sense, you can kind of frame the good news of the gospel as, hey, guess what? Good news. You don't have to be God. God will be God.
Exactly. But our desire to control. So we pivot from, hey, the longing for a world to be ordered, that's a good desire. And we go to control idolatry so fast in our own hearts.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I remember early on in the COVID days, pastoring and just really struggling with, people are really, really freaked out. And just in some ways, people have just become so irrational in their fear and their anxiety, and just feeling really discouraged by that and kind of frustrated with people of like, oh, come on, we got to just, be tough and be strong Christians. And we're the last people that should be afraid of dying. But then I went and I read this little pamphlet that Martin Luther had written about whether or not Christians can flee from the plague. Because plague was this huge issue in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. And, this big debate about what do you do when the plague comes to your city? Do the pastors leave? Do the Christians leave? Do you close down church? What do you do? And Luther's, who was famous or infamous for being very harsh and abrasive and hardcore, this pamphlet, he basically was like, should Christians flee from the plague? No, they probably shouldn't. But his main point was, Christians, for the most part, though, are just kind of weak, and it's hard for them, and you just got to be patient with them and be kind to them, and don't beat their butts over it. And I was so convicted by that of like, oh yeah, and not that like, oh, everyone else is weak and I'm not. I'm weak in many ways too, and fearful in many ways. But kind of being able to like let go of that. I have to control other people, and they have to see things the way I do, and I know I'm right, and they don't see it yet. And that can be really hard for Bitcoiners sometimes, as they get really frustrated with their churches, and it's like a part of you wants to just be like, hey, it's okay. Jesus died for the church. He loves the church. She's slow, takes her a long time. That's okay. You do what you can to help, but you don't need to get all wound up about it.
And I would just ask people to be patient with us Bitcoiners, because you might hear fear. I'm asking you to describe passion for understanding. That's what I'm asking for. The kingdom of God is going to advance unhindered. If all the money goes to nothing, everything goes to nothing, we have each other, we have Jesus, we have one another, we're fine. That's my whole point. My whole point is we are fine eternally. We can now have these conversations freely.
Right. Right. Great. Well, any parting thoughts or encouragements you want to leave with people?
No. Thanks for having me on and kind of debriefing General Assembly. Again, just really appreciate your work. From what I understand, we generated a lot of work for y'all on the heels of last week.
We did.
Yes.
Jim at one point turned to me and said, we may be biting off way more than we can chew here.
Yes. And, we can figure that out, but just appreciate what y'all are trying to do and help churches, and I'm thankful to be a part of it.
Great. Thanks, Ben. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.